So we have thrown a lot already. You've learned about toes and toe boards and wind chest and grate and swell and getting shocked when you turn on things and wiring and all sorts of other stuff. In the break, Kay, you had mentioned something that I want to invite you to share if that's okay.
Somebody said recently over TV that the longer a certain person talked, the dumber she felt. That's kind of the way I felt the longer Patrick talked. The point I just wanted to bring up and maybe remind us of was that at the time the organ was installed, we knew that Mr. Lee was using used parts. And he was doing that to save us money, which at that particular time was just as important, maybe more important than it is now. So it's not like he used stuff that we didn't know about it. We did.
And related to that, I want to emphasize that I think everyone along the way, with all the stuff that we've sort of thrown at you over the last little bit, I think everyone's intentions are to do what is best for this congregation. Without a doubt, that this was all done with love and care and concern. And so to be smart about how we do things, I think that's a really important point. And so thank you, Kay, for sharing that.
Patrick, in doing some reading about all of this, what do you think about just the newer digital organs? I mean, my understanding is that the new ones can simulate a pipe organ.
So my personal opinion on that, I have played at churches that have pipe organs. I have played at churches with digital organs. I own a digital church organ I moved a year ago and it's in storage right now. But what I can tell you, there's a couple things here. What I can tell you that is particularly unique about Epiphany is that I do not believe that we could buy a factory model digital organ and have it sound anything like you would want it to sound because of the unusual structure and acoustics of our sanctuary. You would need to have a custom-built digital organ, and I think you would need to change a lot. You would need to make some acoustical improvements to the sanctuary. That being said, digital organs have a very limited lifespan. Pipe organs, when properly constructed, have an unlimited lifespan. I know a lot of you are foreign travelers. Didn't we just say somebody wasn't here? Oh, y'all were just out of town. If you have been in any churches in Europe or places like that, some of those organs you're looking at are from the 14 and 1500s, and they're still playing. So if we install a properly constructed pipe organ, it is going to not only outlast everybody that's sitting here in this room today, it will probably be here when Jesus comes back. A digital organ only lasts about 20 to 25 years. At that point, you will have to completely replace the instrument again. And from my own experience, let me say that my digital is not a little practice organ. It is a real church organ. I know 2 churches in Greensboro that have exactly the same model. It is about 24 years old now, and although it is from the most reputable digital organ manufacturer out there, it is now encountering problems that cannot be fixed without replacing major parts that cost more than the current value of the instrument. I have a friend who I frequently substitute for at a very large church in Greensboro who plays a gigantic 4-manual digital instrument that was just installed about 10-ish years ago. And it's from a very, very high dollar fancy digital organ builder, and it is nothing but problems. I go in there and it's some of the same issues we have here. Switches that you pull and don't activate. I have talked with her extensively about it, and she has told me that she can't even get somebody to come service her digital organ unless they get notice that, oh, 3 or 4 other churches in Greensboro are having problems and want you there too. We'll come work on it. The organ is 10 years old, 10-ish years old, and the church is already talking about replacing it. So that's my take on digital instruments. Again, like you said, they are a playing of a recording of a pipe organ, like we were talking about with our current digital organ. It's a playback of a sample. It's not live sound. That was probably way more explanation.
Obviously, the goal is this. The goal is for us to have, quality, safe, finished organ here at Epiphany. That we're not having to continually change, repair, worry about Kathleen Tucker getting shot or anything else like that. We want it to be something that we set and like any other thing, you have to do regular maintenance on, but not something that we're doing continual major pieces of maintenance and saying, is this digital engine going to work or not, or anything like that.
And can I speak up to
Yeah,
that?
sure.
The only maintenance to a pipe organ should be annual tuning and lubricating of the blower. That is all the maintenance that an organ requires. If it is an electro-pneumatic organ, which we would have to have simply because of the shape of our sanctuary, there are some pieces of leather that would be in the chest upon which the pipes sit, and they would need to be replaced about 70 years from the date of installation.
So, let me just sort of run through the process of where we've been. Because this is a conversation that just didn't happen like this. You can probably sense that Patrick and I have spent a fair amount of time having these conversations over the last probably 3.5 to 4 years. And so what has happened is that we worked with 3 different organ builders. All 3 of them have years of experience in terms of working on maintaining organs and also building organs as well too. And it's been in congregations of various sizes. So it's not just the large cathedral type church, it's, or the small little chapel. It's, a variety of contexts. Because the most important part of the room, or the most important part of the organ, is the room itself. One of the things that my worship and music professor taught me when I was going through seminary is that the space always wins. No matter what you have, the space always wins. And spaces matter a great deal. And so, the acoustic stuff that Patrick was talking about earlier, that's just a part of the space that organ builders, whether it's a digital organ or a pipe organ, are going to take into consideration when they build this. In addition, I did talk with my worship and music professor, a guy by the name of Bob Hawkins. Bob taught at Southern Seminary for 26 years. His background is that he did his PhD at Notre Dame and has organ performance background. Is somebody that is not out to sell us an organ, but is somebody that knows his way around organs and church life as well too. His wife is an excellent pastor, and so he knows churches, and he knows church music programs. He's currently serving as a church musician in Chapin, South Carolina. Before he was in Chapin, he taught at Newberry College in their organ performance program there, as well as church music program there. All of which is to say, he's not out to sell us an organ. He's out to just sort of give us an unbiased opinion of what we got. And basically, we've got about 5 different options that are there. The first one would be to repair the instrument, and I think that's probably the least financially of a good idea for us for a lot of reasons. And the metaphor that I would use is before I bought my Toyota Camry, we were in San Antonio, and the air conditioner on my Honda Civic with 190,000 miles went out in the middle of July in San Antonio. And so we got some AC, some Freon or whatever it is now, R134A or whatever it's called now, and filled it back up, and the AC was gone. It was shot. And so to replace all of that was actually more than the entire value of the car. And so at that point, Caroline and I talked about it, and we said, it's time to get something replaced. And so that's why I have a Toyota Camry now. I think we would be doing the same sort of thing if we talked about, well, if we rewire this, if we do the console stuff, if we do all that sort of stuff, we would probably be in for more than what we would be dealing with if we just started over. Because all 4 of the folks that we talked to said, you just got to start over on this. So I think repairing the instrument is kind of one that we can say, nope. There is the option of doing nothing, to Joanna's comment of saying, what does the future of church music look like? I think that's an important conversation for us to have. If I had to guess, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds of this, I think we're probably headed in a direction where it's going to be a hybrid of sorts of things. Our Lutheran tradition has hymn singing as a part of it. Always has. I think it always will. But at the same time, to Joanna's point, it's not just that. And I welcome that conversation, and I think we need to have it. I'm not so sure that this morning is the time that we need to have that. We Lutherans like to fight about music. In my first congregation, that was when the ELW was being introduced, and we were switching from the Green Book. For those of you that were Lutheran back then, you remember the Green Book, and going to ELW. And there were no small conversations at my first congregation about what was going to be in the new hymnal. Was A Mighty Fortress going to be in there? Was Beautiful Savior going to be in there? What settings of the liturgy were going to be in there? What color is the book, Pastor? All of those sorts of questions were coming at me as a young pastor in this congregation. And that's because we Lutherans like our music. That's a part of who we are as a congregation. So if I had to guess, and I am not in the predictions business, but if I had to guess, I think we're headed in sort of a hybrid direction that's there. All right, so the next one is the digital organ, getting to Diana's comment that's there. And I want to just kind of talk through some of the implications of that. If we go through the digital process, let me talk to you a little bit about Caroline's home congregation in Columbia. Caroline grew up at Spring Valley Presbyterian Church in Columbia, and their sanctuary was built in the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere around there, as the northeast side of Columbia started to explode. And when they built their sanctuary, they made the choice to go with the digital organ in the late 80s. And then about 5 years ago, they realized that their digital organ that they had, which was about 25 years old, was having some major failures and some major issues. And so what they had to do is to go back to the congregation and to say, okay, folks, it's time to replace the digital organ. And their all-in cost for that, and this was about 5 years ago, was a little bit over $200,000 for that.
And that must have been a factory floor spec digital organ, because a custom-built digital organ would be significantly more.
Correct. And the more important thing for me that I want us to think about is that about every generation or so, if we go with the digital option, what that means is that we would be going back to the congregation again and saying, our digital organ is having some major failures and we're going to have to replace it. So let's say, just for giggles, that we're going to talk about $300,000 for a digital organ. It could be more than that, could be less, but I think we're somewhere in that range.
About 3 or 4 years ago, when Mickey's previous congregation, Naples, what's the name of it?
Sedge Garden.
Had to install a custom-built digital organ. I think that was about 3 or 4 years ago, before we had all the inflation stuff. I know that was over $400,000.
So what you would do at that point is, if you start to add up the cost for that, every generation or so, you're going to be doing another capital campaign for 6 figures easily to replace the organ. And it's an ongoing cost that's going to be a part of your life together as a church. The other option that we looked at was what's called a hybrid organ. This is a builder out of the Charlotte area that excels in doing digital and hybrid instruments out of the Charlotte area. The cost of that breed was around $550,000 for that. And so while it would give us the same number of stops that we had when the digital organ was working with the pipe organ, the reality is this: it still involves digital equipment. And digital equipment still has a lifespan that's there with that. And while digital technology has improved, the upgrades that are going to need to happen over time, that's a matter of when, not if, in that instance. And then there's the last option, which is the pipe organ. And so we have talked with we had 2 bids that were specifically pipe organ only. One was based with a firm out of the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, and it was the most expensive of all the bids. The other one was a builder based out of Mocksville, and that bid that he gave us was $588,000, which is a lot of money. And not necessarily something that we're saying like, hey, we want to do this just because. But when you think about the conditions stuff that we've got going on, we need to do something, getting back to Jim's comment. So while it's the most costliest option up front, for the long-term history of this congregation, it's actually the cheapest in the long run. Because you're not going back to the congregation in another generation and saying, hey, we need to raise, last time we raised $300,000, who knows what it'll be in 20 years from now, I know it won't get cheaper. And so already you've spent more as a congregation on that. The disadvantage of what we would have with the organ, with the all pipe, is that we would not have as many stops as we have with the digital and the pipe piece. However, in talking with the builder that we've talked with, we think we can overcome that and still have a solid instrument that's there. It will need to be refurbished at some point in the future, but we're talking long after all of us
Are way dead.
are very dead. And part of the reason for that is that the technology that's used behind the pipe organs has pretty much stayed unchanged for many centuries. All the builders that we talked with have guarantees on their work and have extended warranties. The guy that's based out of Moxville that we want to present, that we think is the option we need to go with, is, in Moxville. So it's not like we're talking about somebody that's in Texas or California or wherever. And if, God forbid, something were to happen to him, the way that he would construct an organ would be sort of within the standards that Patrick was talking about earlier, so that any builder could take a look at what's going on there and go, okay, this is what this is. Let me tell you a little bit about Tom Lutok, real quick. All right. So Tom is based out of Moxville. He moved down here about a little bit over 12 or 13 years ago from upstate New York around Syracuse. And Tom is Polish and immigrated to the United States. He's been in the organ guild and working on organs since he's 16 years old. So he's got a long history, of doing things.
How old is he?
I'd
say late 50s?
Yeah, late 50s, somewhere around there. He has built organs throughout the world. Not as big, not as the biggest shop in the world, but somebody that will build a solid instrument.
And I just want
Yeah.
to say, since you said around the world, he actually, which I think is a testament to his organ building skills, Denmark, which has one of the strongest organ building traditions of anywhere in Europe, he is the first American organ builder who was ever asked to build an organ in the country of Denmark, which is a very unusual thing.
So locally here, Tom has done some restorations of several different instruments in the area, and you can read those. Calvary Moravian, our friends at Parkway Pres down the street, Ardmore Moravian, Trinity Moravian, St. Leo the Great, and Fairview. So it's, he has done work in this community. The one thing, I checked in with those congregations. They've all been pleased with his work. He has built new organs in Greenville, North Carolina, and then also in Columbia, South Carolina. And then, in different places like in Denmark with what Patrick was talking about. The one thing that has not happened so far is that he has not had a new instrument that he's built in the triad. And so part of while $588,000 is a lot of money, I will also tell you that I know that our friends at Augsburg are going through an organ replacement. I don't know all the details behind that, but I do know that the contract that they just signed for their organ was $1.5 million. And
they're replacing an organ that's less than 20 years old.
And in my congregation in San Antonio, when we did the organ transplant, we had to get the organ insured. The replacement value of the organ that we had insured there, and this was 7 years ago now, was $1.5 million on that. So $588,000, a lot of money. But when we talked with our capital campaign consultants and started having the first conversations, they said, you could easily go $1 million these days very easily with that. All of which is to say that I think part of the price is that Tom would not have to be traveling on a regular basis. You know, he's driving in from Knoxville. And as I've talked with folks that are in the organ world, beyond Patrick, his reputation is that he builds very, very solid instruments. To use a car metaphor, we would not be getting a BMW, we'd be getting a Toyota Camry. Does that make sense? You know, very sensible meat and potatoes sort of thing that's there. So, in terms of the time with what we're looking at, you know, Lutoc has a long history, solid reputation. All of this is very, very tentative. Let me scroll through with all of this. This is sort of the next question. We're in the information gathering phase, like Dave was talking about earlier. We need to have so things could change between now and then. But if we were to go with Lutoc in talking with him, he has basically said if we were to sign a contract at some point in the first quarter of 2024, we would probably be next on his list of building an organ. That doesn't happen overnight. You know, there's a lot of measurement and thinking through and all of that sort of thing. And so over the next, basically 2024, we would be working on all of that. And his hope is that we could be done as soon as Christmas of 2024. Now, that all can change, so don't hold me to that. But that's kind of the tentative timeline that we're talking about. And you know, it could be that another congregation is having the same conversation or is a couple months ahead of us, and that they're ready to sign a contract, and then that sort of shifts us to a different position and things like that. I don't say that to put pressure on us, because I want us to make to do the right thing. I don't want us to get rushed into it, but it's just to say all of this can change and shift.